Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Steps to Soul podcast. As we teased last week, we're going to talk about buyers not all be created equal, except today we're going to talk more about the lower middle market and how those buyers differ from Main Street and other types of transactions. Christopher, welcome back to the show.
Hey, good morning, Brandon.
Good morning indeed. We are here. And for all you out there today, the goal again today is educate sellers and buyers on the different types of buyers that are out there. And buyers say, well, why do I need to be educated? Well, it's simple. How you conduct yourself does matter and how you get deals done. And you could be surprised the things you think you're doing are actually going to be derailers of you getting access and actually being able to do a deal. So on that note, you want to be a true closer and not a pretender, as we said last week. So let's talk a little bit, Chris, about what makes these, mid-market size deals a little bit different and why it's even more important to screen even than Main Street deals. Because let's be honest, middle market deals are a very fine line. Let's say the size is 4 million to 20 million. Conventional financing isn't always available. SBA has a limit to 5 to the cap with a little over. There's some ways you can structure it. So all the SBA knowledge people out there, we know you can go over 5, but basically 5 is the hard cap. That's a hard spin. And if you're not a well-funded group or very successful private individual, that's hard. So for all these guys out there who are dreaming and searching, when you enter that lower middle market space, there's a lot more requirements to get through the door. It's not like you can just sign an NDA and hope to do something. Am I wrong, Chris? It is a different level. It requires different analytics, support, and ability to execute. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. It's not like flipping real estate, right? It's like you said, it's highly nuanced. It's a very time-intensive process. Sellers may only go through this process once in their lifetime, and it comes with enormous personal and financial stakes. And unfortunately, not every buyer who shows up, at least for mine, and I know for you, they're not worth engaging because, if they're inquiring about a $10 million deal and they put on their NDA or buyer profile, they've got a couple $100,000. That's too far of a stretch. Unless you've got some investors that are going to come on board, they're going to sign NDAs, they're going to show their net worth. We're probably not going to engage with a buyer like that. And I hate to say it like that because I'm going to call them and let them know. But this deal is not for you. Let's take a look at some other listings that maybe are more in line with things that you could finance or get financed. So, some of these guys, they like capital. And I think you said it best last week. Some are just exploring, right? They're not committing to the process. They're looking online, they're making some clicks, and they're seeing what's out there, and that's fine. I get that. But as brokers and as business owners, if you've got some of these buyers approaching you, that's the first step in the process is what can you actually afford?
That's absolutely correct. So let's talk about the types of buyers. We kind of highlighted them last week, but let's go over the ones. There's some overlaps. So if everybody listening, you're going to hear some of the same types of categories, but there's a little bit different nuances and some new ones in today's episode. So first off, there's always tire kickers. You've got the same unfunded searchers we kind of referenced just now. You've got funded searchers with independent sponsors, and we'll dive more into that when we get to that topic, because I think you and I could have a very good discussion on how those differ, and you know right away when you see them, and we'll talk about that. You still got private equity groups, family offices, strategic buyers, and then obviously there's the same quote unquote, as we call them, the closers, the really good, guys from the beginning. And that a closer can come from all these different categories, but the traits of a closer are still different. But let's start with the obvious. We had said it last week. It follows every type of deal you do out there in the world. Tire kickers, right, Chris? Especially at the lower middle market level, where there's way more at stake financially and it's way more sophisticated process. These tire kickers, especially if sophisticated and, like you said, are exploring and may have a financial background, may have an acquisition background to some degree, can waste 3 to 5 months of a transaction, can they not? It is, sure. Those are the most scary ones because they burn out sellers. And sellers, you have to be able to identify them quickly. So give me some thoughts on how you can identify those tire kickers very quickly, Chris.
Well, you and I want to make sure that we back up a second and say tire kickers are not always guys who are underfunded. Sometimes they're almost too well funded, and they're
too
spending
picky.
their days looking for businesses and trying to find deals, right? They're not looking to actually buy a business for its value. They're looking for, hey, can I lowball this guy? As it's been on the market too long? Can I take advantage of a situation? So you've got those kind of guys. Then there's the unfunded searchers. Those are sharp entrepreneurial folks with a vision but no capital, right? Which makes them even riskier if they tie up, just like you said, they're going to tie you up in an LOI and they'll never follow through. So yeah, back to your tire kickers. What do they look like? They're the guys that they're inquiring about 4 and 5 different businesses at the same time, and we catch a few of those because we operate as a network here with Sunbelt, and we can see it
Mm-hmm.
come through the NDA system. Hey, how many times has this guy inquired on different businesses? And it's not that it's a bad thing necessarily, but you see a trend and you see a trait, and if it doesn't go anywhere, you kind of it's a red flag, right?
You start to identify it quickly, and you're not wrong. And one thing we notice all the time that we talk about, because our integrated CRM is, oh, he gave Chris a different financial form. He gave me, Brandon, a different financial form. He gave Cheryl a different financial form. And that's scary too, because if your financial form should not change in 2 weeks, that especially at the level that some of these guys modify them. So do you really have the money? Are you guessing? Are you already spending all your capital? Are you constantly moving and shaking? And it's okay to have things in operation, right? But when it fluctuates that much, that's a concern. It means you're not either don't know or you're not being honest pretty often. And that's even worse. And for tire kickers, I'll add a trait too. You said it best, and unfunded searchers as well. Put an LOI in place. And I said it last week. If anybody throws an LOI at you so quickly, be careful. A lot of these guys will throw an LOI out there because they've been taught, hey, sign the NDA, fill the financial form out, and get an LOI as quick as possible, right? A lot of them are being taught, hey, have a call with the owner, then put the LOI out there. You can always restructure it later. Don't worry about getting it perfect right now. And I think that's the wrong approach to take because you're not committing to the process. You're committing to just getting something tangible in your hand. If you really want to buy a company, I said last week, you go from interested to committed to obsessed. If you're obsessed and you really want to do this, you understand that, okay, NDA, financial form are going to be required. Secondly, if you're not wanting to fill them out, you're not getting anywhere. So you got to get committed to that. Secondly, you got to have to meet the owner, have a conversation. If all you care about is just being committed to looking at P&Ls and balance sheets, you're never going to buy a company, right, Chris? You're just not. It's not going to work. So you have to start committing to developing a relationship with the broker and the owner, developing an understanding of what this company is. And then after you've realized this is a culture and strategic fit for me and my background and my skill set and what's in front of me, then you start looking at financials and then you inquire on making an LOI and start making that process. If you're trying to skip the steps and be super efficient, you're never going to be effective. And that's what those two groups specifically are, especially when they're underfunded. So that brings us to the next group, the funded searcher, right, Chris? An independent sponsor. There are legit search groups out there. Let me say this clearly. There are a lot of legit ones out there. Guys that have gone to either very good MBA schools or have backing from other groups. Those you can spot on their landing page. When you and I know we get a searcher inquires on the business, we see the landing page, you see if they have committed capital or not, right, Chris? And that's a big, massive indicator. Is this person a legit searcher or what we call a tie kicker or a dreamer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They often require what the deal to deal funding. So it's not like they
Mm-hmm.
have the funding for every deal, but if they get one they look at, they go to their investors and they have to kind of get their approval. It's almost like having a PLP SBA lender. Like, can you get the
Mm-hmm.
deal done by yourself, or
Pre-qual
do you
letter.
have to ask for permission to get this deal done and get their cash before you can even move forward? It's not that it could be a win-win. They might be able to
Mm-hmm.
get the cash, but you've got this third party involved who's in the background saying yes or no.
Yep, you're right. And the good ones identify their investors or have a group that's identified on their page that tells you, hey, this is the group that's already sponsored me. I dealt with a great young man in his early 30s, had an agricultural background, and he was looking to buy a company. And we had a one time deal for a microchip company we spoke to that specialized in agriculture. And he came to the table and he's like, look, this is money that I had to bring. Here's my team that backs me. You can look all their profiles up. I've got them right here laid out for you. Here's my process. Here's what I want to do. It made a legit offer. Didn't work out. That's okay. He then went on to buy something about a year later, but he was transparent. Like you said, always be transparent in the process. He showed his investors and showed the money and showed the experience. He was what I considered a real searcher. For every 100 people that claim they're a searcher, maybe I would, from my experience, maybe 5 are legit. And I don't mean it to degrade or be mean to that industry, but it's true, right, Chris? A lot of people have watched the videos on Instagram and YouTube and be your own boss and follow this rule. Those aren't real searchers. The real searchers have these connections with these wealthy individuals who have already done this before with other groups and have a portfolio they can show you so you know that this capital is committed or can be accessed, as you said. They got to get permission, but it can be accessed. And that's important. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter how qualified this guy is. When you're looking to buy a $5 to $10 to $20 million deal, You need capital, especially with the lending the way it is today. It's not easy, right? I mean, it's not just snap the fingers.
Absolutely not. And maybe the 95 out of the 100 that aren't true searchers right now, or they're not the 5 out of 100 like you mentioned. Maybe they get
Mm-hmm.
there eventually. Maybe they
Yeah.
start figuring out, hey, why is this broker not returning my call, or why is this business owner not interested in doing a deal with me? You'll start figuring those things out, and you'll get more refined at your process, and you'll
Mm-hmm.
understand what you need to bring to the table. That would be my hope for everybody who's truly
Correct.
looking to buy a business, is that you kind of figure out the steps. You figure out why this isn't working. What do I need to do to get better at buying a business? And
Mm-hmm.
especially if you want one of this size that we're talking about today.
Then you're not wrong. And we hope they refine their process. It doesn't mean we won't help you, but we also have to tell you, and our job is to be the point guard of the deal and say, you're not qualified for this deal. And I know that's hard to hear from people. They don't want to hear those words, right? You're not qualified or you are not prepared for this deal. But there are times when that's the broker's primary job is to protect the seller's interest in saying, do not release proprietary information to someone who is not qualified. Like you're not going to go look at a $10 million house and have the realtor show you around for 2 hours if you're not qualified. They're not going to do it. That's what it is. And I know a lot of searchers and buyers think, oh, I got a pre-qual letter for 5 million. Yes. And that's the bottom end of the lower middle market. You start looking at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, $15 million in value. You can't parlay an SBA loan plus this, plus that. You already told me you got to get past 3 different third-party independent people to get the funding to do this deal. On the scale of things, when the owner has options from other buyers, you're way down the list. And that's not disrespectful. That's just the pecking order of who's there, right? So who is that seller going to talk to? Let's roll into the next type of buyer. The private equity groups or family offices, groups that have committed capital, especially legit ones, who can make moves, have a portfolio, have a website that shows you that the projects they've worked on, moved on, transitioned from, or funds, how many funds they've completed. When those guys walk through the door, you know you've got committed capital. And that's really important. And they distinguish themselves with their process. They're going to be sophisticated in most cases, and they're going to know what they want to do. The only thing for sellers to be wary of is these are sophisticated buyers and they know how to play the game. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but the game is real. And knowing how to play it does matter in structuring your deal and how to go to market. And interacting with those guys is going to be different than interacting with a funded searcher, is it not, Chris?
Yeah, the family offices, they're going to be flexible and strategic, but on the negative side, they're going to be a little slow moving. And I say negative, that can actually be a good thing. Sometimes things need to move at a slower pace, and not. It's kind of like you talked about earlier with the somebody rushing out that LOI.
That's
The
true.
the strategics like competitors, adjacent industry players, they can bring
Mm-hmm.
synergies and strong valuations, but they're also confidentiality risk. I've run into that all the time.
Yes.
In the next market over is looking at buying you. Well, he's going to how is he going to do due diligence if he can't see your customer list and vendor list? And yes, we can try and redact that, but it's a grueling process to try and get through something like that. So you've got your positives that they probably
Mm-hmm.
understand your industry or they've got the money, but there can be some negatives there as well.
You're not wrong. The economies of scale for them is what makes them so attractive. Is that, hey, I can integrate, and to grow organically would take so much longer and a lot more capital spent than doing the acquisitions. And most companies have realized that now. It's Yes, there's risk in buying another company, especially your competitor. But the flip side is the years it would take to get that market share organically may not even be obtainable in a reasonable amount or money in a reasonable amount of time. So that's why it's so attractive. And as an owner, you have to be prepared for those people because often they give you the best deal because they actually do understand your business. And often you know them. You may not be friends, but you may know of each other or have dealt with each other or competed against each other for projects, deals. We just listed a very strong general contractor and plumbing company that's doing about a little over $2 million in EBITDA. He's like, I got 3 people I spoke to regionally that make great sense. I want to have a little work deal on them, but the rest, here's some other names to call who I would make great sense for. Don't give them all my whip right away, but seriously, that's okay. He acknowledged that. Like, that would be the best fit for me. Someone outside coming in is going to be a lot harder to structure a deal because of the local market and my relationships. But someone locally who needs to get into the space or a bigger player who doesn't work in the lower level, I'm their best fit. And I understand that and I accept that. That's being a sound, smart seller, but also realizing that we're going to have to approach these groups because, especially in general contract, that's a very hard field to find buyers for, and the multiple is tough to get sometimes. So that's where strategic makes the most sense because they understand that value to them. They want it. We talked about closers last week, so we won't dive too hard on the closers. But I will say this, closers at this level have to have at least three things in my opinion. They've got to have capital committed, if not directly accessible. If it is third party, there needs to be a clear path to how it's going to be distributed. I think you have to have the administrative slash business leadership background and experience that not all, for example, like searchers and tie kickers don't always have, especially unfunded searchers. And then three, they've got to have the people skills. And that's different, I think, than administrative skills. Closers know how to work deals this size and understand the pressures and accept the pressures, both psychological, mental, physical, of doing a deal of this size. You might say, Brandon, why is it physical and tough? When you're leveraging 10, 20, $30 million, that's a lot. That's your future. That's hard. That's a lot. That's a big pill to swallow. And it takes some mental and physical ability and strength on top of your own personal skill set, on top of your funding to have ready for that. That's not easy. And I think a lot of people sometimes look at that aspect last, their risk tolerance. True closers understand and have identified their risk tolerance and know their playbook. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'd say one thing too is closers are transparent. I know I used that word last week and we used it again on this.
Keep
That's
saying it.
one thing I noticed. They are cards on the table. Let's talk about this. They're not trying to hold anything. Yeah, they
Mm-hmm.
still want a good deal. Don't get me wrong. They're not
Who
trying to pay
doesn't?
top dollar or overpay for a business. They're not willing to overpay. But they're transparent about the way they come in. And I would encourage a lot of I've noticed that with tire kickers is that they barely give you any information about themselves. They don't want to give you their financial background
Mm-hmm.
or what they're doing. They want to give you as little information as you need so they can take a look at the business and try to make an offer on it if that's even the case. But the one thing I've noticed on the bigger deals, the $5 to $10 million, these buyers came in and they were like, "Hey, this is who we are, or this is who
Mm-hmm.
I am, and this is what we have to offer, and this is what we can do for this company going forward." And it was like right from the beginning. Then you knew you had a good fit because now we can get a buyer seller call set up. The seller, my client, can tell him all about his company that I didn't include in
Mm-hmm.
the sim and give a personal feel to the whole deal. And it starts it off on a relationship. And I would say that that's an important fact that buyers need to, you got to establish this relationship. Otherwise, it's just kind
Mm-hmm.
of this paper LOI. Hey, we're offering based on the P&L and numbers, and really doesn't work a whole lot of times.
It doesn't. And that kind of jumps a little to a topic we were going to cover later in the podcast, but let's hit it now. What differentiates a true closer in the market, right? Especially lower middle market. You said it best, transparency, first thing. I think the next best thing you hinted at was respect for the seller in the process, laying your cards out and being disciplined in that regard. Nothing a seller wants to know more than, why are you approaching me and why do you like what I have to offer and why are you a fit for my people and my company? And when you lay those cards out and you expose yourself to criticism as a buyer by doing that, the seller may not always like what you have to say, but a lot of sellers respect that. Hey, I see exactly where you're coming from and what you want to propose and why you make a sense for my team. I can see areas I'm going to have issues with, but I can also identify those and have discussions early on. Instead of throwing an LOI at the guy as a buyer and saying, hey, here's the LOI. We're making you a great offer. Look at the price. You have to take this. You're going to have to sort all that out. But having honest, transparent, and respecting the professional process of getting to develop the relationship, as you said, be transparent and respect the process allows a seller to better understand who they're getting in bed with when they sign that LOI. And then if there are issues down the road, you've already kind of ironed out some of those strategic thoughts and transitional phases you're going to have to go through about, hey, how I want to structure this. Well, look, we did a small lower middle market deal a while back, you and I. The key was the GM running the operations. The seller came in from day on, wanted that, made that clear. We knew that was going to be a goal to get him probably a part of equity or some kind of employment agreement to protect him and get him a bonus. And by having that discussed early on, when the LOI came in, when everything else came up, man, it was easy to sell. It was easy to explain, and it guided the whole transaction. It was a thorough LOI. It was respected the process. We met in person, we discussed financials. We had multiple different meetings and calls before we even got to that point. So both parties knew what they were getting into. And that allowed us to actually help the transaction forward, not sit there and constantly be tearing doors and shutting doors back at each other. It was a constant streamline. Yeah, there were their hiccups like every deal, but it made a culture and strategic fit that this buyer wanted to be involved, not but be absentee, but he also wanted to be involved. He was driving over, he was checking in. It was a long drive for him. It was not someone in market, and that mattered
Yeah, they seem to move quickly when you know a good deal's coming together,
at the
right?
right times too.
Yeah, it's not too quick. It's not like overly aggressive quick, but Every time I've worked with somebody who I felt like we were going to get a deal done, it was a quick
Hmm.
process. They were moving through diligence. It was structured. They were bringing in their pros early, whether it's an attorney, accountant, Q of E guys. They were bringing those in the process at the right time. They weren't delaying
Hmm.
all that out for weeks and months on end. I,
Yes.
I would say that they avoid getting bogged down in indecision, right? About how do we go through this? They've got
Hmm.
the answers. They've done this before, or they know how they want to get it done. So I think those are all important facets of good buyers in this industry.
I agree. They weren't afraid to speak out on things they know they absolutely wanted and made those communicated. Whereas others, they understood and communicated, I can work on this, but this is not, it's not negotiable, but I have to have something in this realm. And that's very important because a lot of people think, well, my offer is my offer. And let's talk about the red flags these buyers bring, because I think we're transitioning into that very smoothly here. Overly aggressive LOIs or LOIs that are very vague in one page. If you as a buyer come in and say, well, this is my LOI and this is what I do, I don't change my deal structure. Thank you for being honest, but you've now set a very tough tone to go forward. And that's not for you. That's fine. Or the opposite is, hey, I have, here's an LOI. We'll figure it all out down the road. I hate that because you leave room for interpretation. And people, when they do deals, want to understand what they're agreeing to, especially when you have a lot of conversation and you don't narrow it down. Then for the LOI, handshake deals and offhand comments get stored in the back of buyers' brains and sellers. And when the deal does get structured, well, hey, we talked about XYZ and it's not in the document. Why not? I know you had one of those where clients had lunch, made an offhand comment 5 months before the deal. When it came down to the closing, the buyer expected to get that. And the buyer was communicative and transparent and made it clear, but the seller didn't realize what he opened his mouth and said. And it wasn't a bad thing. Let's be clear. This isn't a bad thing. It's just transparency and getting everything written up appropriately at the right times and moving with the right speed prevents issues like this from occurring, or even having the opportunity to I guess fluster and flare up and inflame. Good buyers understand that. Good sellers should understand that. But nothing's worse than you talk about red flag strategics coming in, Chris, and saying, well, we're just exploring. We're thinking about growing by acquisition. Well, either you are willing to do it or you're not. You shouldn't be exploring. You should be saying, we are committed to growing. Here's our growth plan. And that's a red flag I've seen lately from strategics that, well, we're exploring. We know we want to kind of do something, but we don't know who or what, or we're just kind of open to the idea. When you do acquisitions, Chris, you and I know we've talked about buying company. Either you're committed to buying a company, go back to my same statement. You're interested, you're committed, or you're obsessed. And strategics that use that language, that's a red flag, is it not?
Yeah, yeah. You don't want to start a process and ghosting starts happening. Sudden disappearances. They start playing games. You can't. One
Proprietary
time you're
information
texting
getting
and
seen.
emailing and calling, and they're responding, and the next couple of weeks they it takes 3 days before they respond to you.
Mm-hmm.
The buyers that respect the process, respect the time of the seller and the broker, even those are the guys that are going to get deals done.
Yeah. And if you're just exploring, just understand that automatically means you should not see anything proprietary. Maybe the seller's okay with you finding out they're for sale, but if you're just exploring the idea, you're interested, you're not committed. And I went through my whole few last podcast. Go listen to it. I laid it out. If you're interested, you should not be in the lower middle market space. There's too much liability, there's too much capital, and too much risk. You really shouldn't be interested in the Main Street space, but let alone the lower middle market, but the time and effort it's going to take to do a deal. If you're not committed at some point to making something happen and getting past the exploring phase, then you can have real conversations and real discussions. You don't have to commit as far as doing the full deal all the way through if it doesn't fit. That's understandable. But real buyers, true closers, and true strategics get obsessed with acquisitions, and they make it clear their game plan. They make it clear how they want to go structure something. And that, as we talked about, they're professional, transparent, and want to work because they understand not every deal is going to be cookie cutter like they've done previously. We worked with a large HVAC company in the region, Chris. We're not going to name names, but how transparent was their process and how much were they just tire kicking all the time? And then funny how everyone in our group had spoken to them at a different time in a very short period, and LOIs were thrown out and they weren't even responded to once they were signed. They weren't even communicated, or they would tell you, here, we're going to do this deal. 30 seconds later, half price, half value, half terms was sent in, was it not? Talk about killing your reputation as a buyer and killing
Yeah,
yourself as a group.
yeah. Especially if you're looking to do one deal and you do that, that's fine. You'll find another company and you'll be fine. But if you're absolutely looking like this company was, to grow in the region and acquire multiple things, and you're burning through brokers by setting up our clients and sellers, telling them
Hmm.
one thing and then coming in the next day and offering 60-70% of that on paper. It's not a good fit. It's not a good look for
It's
you, I should
tacky.
say. Yeah.
It's tacky.
It's unprofessional, and it's going to burn a lot of bridges, which it did in this particular case.
I mean, the fact we had sellers tell us they had a signed LOI from this company, committed both sides, and never heard back from them. I mean, come on. Have the dignity to be a good person. Just say, hey, we changed our minds.
Yeah.
Just because it's not
Yeah.
enforceable doesn't mean you don't do the right stuff. That's
Yeah,
just it.
you got to set that up the right way. If that is the case, you got to set it up with, hey, we looked
Hmm.
at your numbers a little closer, and this is it wasn't any of that, right? It was just say one thing, write another.
You're right. So let's talk about some advice for sellers because we kind of steered into that perfectly. We know we've said it 100 times pre-screen buyers. We're not going to hit that too much harder because we've already hit that so hard. But I really want to talk a lot about, and you and I think are very big proponents of this, is pushing for more details in the LOI. And if anything you take away from this podcast today, the LOI is so much more important. It doesn't mean that it's not enforceable. Nothing I hate more than a vague LOI, because the LOI is the basis of how you're agreeing to date each other and to consummate this relationship down the road. And if you do not properly outline the key points, as we've talked in other podcasts, and we'll go over some of that again today, your LOI is going to guide how far you can go in this transaction. A good, strong LOI with clear terms on working capital, transition, if there's employment agreements to be involved, any equity rolling over. We can go down the list of items that are often included. But if it's not properly straightened out and not properly outlined, it's going to fall apart when it's time to renegotiate. It's going to be very hard to do, and it's going to put unnecessary stress on a deal. A good buyer with a good game plan who is sophisticated and knows what they're doing, or with the help of the broker, should outline a very thorough LOI. Yes, there will be items you have to commit to at a later date to finalize, like the employment agreement, maybe some certain deal structure. Yes, I understand that. But that LOI is so important to get right. And you need, as a seller, to be very sure that you like what you see on paper before you sign, because it is a non binding LOI in most cases. But guess what? If that LOI, you sign on it and there's missing gaps, and that buyer thinks he doesn't have to worry about that, and you do, you're going to be going back and debating those points and wasting a lot of time and money, especially if lawyers and CPAs and every other professional's already been engaged now. You're going to burn through capital and burn through time unnecessarily. I mean, did I miss anything? I mean, I'm sure you got points you can add, but that is my single most, like, take this from me. That's the point I want you to focus on.
Yeah, no, I think you're not wrong. You don't want the one page LOI. You want all the details of what this deal
Mm-hmm.
is supposed to entail. But I would also say this, that you want to read the fine print, and it's usually
Mm-hmm.
not that fine, but it's in there and it's buried. It talks about multiples of STE. So you've got your big
Mm-hmm.
number on page one. You've got the $5 million. This is what we're offering you. But if you go on to
How's it
page
going to be
two,
cut up?
yeah, how's it going to be cut up, and how are we going to get this lowered if we want to get it lowered? They're going to tell you that, hey, this is based on a multiple that you provided us. What's it say? A lot of times it says we're going to find every way possible to get this lower because you've agreed to this.
And now
So
we found a
yeah,
way to
make sure
tie you
you
down.
understand that going in. And the other one that I've run into is the working capital. A lot
Yeah.
of times I work with business owners and they don't even know what their working capital is yet, and we have a hard time calculating it,
Mm-hmm.
not from the formula perspective, but because they haven't kept the greatest books. And so they're working on that. And you and I both encourage, as soon as we get a client that comes through the door, hey, start working on this. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we get started with a listing agreement anyway, and we're going to market, and
That's okay.
we've got a loose idea of what their working capital is. Now the buyer's coming in, they're saying we want X amount working capital because this is what we've seen. Well, if your working capital wasn't precise when we started this process, in other words, if your accounts receivable were kept in a spreadsheet and kicked out the minute they were paid, and you don't really know what your historical accounts receivable are, this
It's
buyer is
tough.
going to find out. And now this working capital peg has come into place. Know all these things in your LOI on especially these larger deals.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about why we're talking about last week versus this week. Last week in a $400,000 deal, maybe that cost you $20,000, something like that. You're into a $5-10 million deal and you're talking about working capital. We could be talking about
Multiple,
$1 million here, right?
multiple
Nobody
six
wants to
figures
lose.
easily.
Yeah, nobody wants to lose. Yeah, a couple $100,000 or $1 million because you didn't have your working capital in order. So the fine print in these LOIs is so important, as well as the details.
You're right. And I would even ask this too about looking at the fine print. Let's elaborate on that a little bit. Ask them about their previous deals. Have you done a deal like this before? And if so, how did it work out? How did it look? If they say they have a playbook, ask them about it. Say, how did it work out? How's it going? Who'd you do it with? Can I even talk to somebody about it possibly if I want to? Those are key items that, I've often heard buyers say, well, this is market and I do this all the time. Is it? How often have you done this exact playbook? Who'd you do it with? If you're, say, a private equity group, which of these other companies you've acquired did you use this exact playbook with? And can I talk to one of the previous owners if he's still on board and see his thoughts on it? If they tell you no, you've got your answer.
Red flag.
Right? You've double red flag. Like, don't even get in the water. Don't put your toe in the water in the sand. Get off the beach. Like, right. Hazardous. And that's not going to happen very often, but it's important to ask. Like good groups we've talked to, Chris, like ones you've worked with and they say, yeah, we've used the same formula with these other 5 companies. We're rolling up into the platform. So-and-so and so-and-so stayed on. These 2 owners didn't, but you can go look them up on our website. Here they are, and you can go contact them. There is, as you said, transparency, and that is so important. And as a seller, if you're not sure, lean on your broker, lean on your attorney, lean on your advisors for advice. You don't have to take something at its value the second you see it. You need to think about it and digest and be sure before you sign anything, because once you sign it, that's going to be the guidelines. And remember, too, the first offer isn't always the best offer. Understand it's your total package, your total transaction value you're going to get. I've seen a lot of different packages come out and play out, like you said, a lot of different ways, especially if you read the fine print and how it's going to be cut up at the end based on the guidelines. Understand what that's going to be. Ask the buyer to give you an idea what it might look like, the final package, how it's going to look in the LOI if they're using a lot of different, structure. You saw one that about 3 or 4 weeks ago, they did a great job of outlining exactly what the equity would look like, how it roll over, what had happened previously. And they outlined all that. And they said, look, granted, we can't guarantee this. And they made that full disclaimer, but they outlined it so you as a seller could digest it and say, I understand it. I get it. I see how this playbook has been done before. I feel comfortable with it. And that was very smart from a sophisticated and honestly a true closer, was it not? That's how you lay it out, being fully transparent. Again, we're going to keep saying that. Obsessed, transparent, and doing it the right way.
Absolutely. I think if business owners and people who are thinking about selling their companies, if they take anything away from this episode, it's this. Just because somebody wants to buy your company, it doesn't mean they can. It doesn't mean they will. How many times have we entered into speaking with a business owner and they say they've got that 1 or 2 person who have been on the sidelines, who've been asking about their business for 6 to 9, 12 months or longer.
Mm-hmm.
And they always want, what do they always want? They want an exclusion for that one guy. They want to say, hey, well, if I kind of brought him to the table, and you brought him 6 months ago. He's been kicking around for 6 months. What's the holdup? So that's my point in saying that. But in this lower middle market, you're going to attract a wide range of buyer types. I think this is where everybody's looking. Nobody's looking
because the money's there to service debt. Right.
Yeah.
And there's stronger EBITDA, better return on investment. And that's not to interrupt you, but it's true, right?
I don't think you're exactly right.
There's more money there to be made. It's not risky. A 200,000 SDE business is one bad year from going under in some times. A $1 million EBITDA company has got a lot of room to work and can get commercial financing once it's acquired to survive or do other options. There's different revenue streams and teams.
Yeah.
And I think as a middle market owner, you have to think in that different space a little bit. Because the deal structure is going to be more sophisticated. Buyers are going to be more sophisticated. Financing is going to be more complicated. It's a different mindset, and it needs to be taken at a different speed and with a different approach. It doesn't mean you don't take every deal seriously, small or large, Main Street, lower middle market. But you said it. No, you just got to understand that you have to put perspective in.
Yeah, don't get distracted when a buyer comes along and says they want to buy your company and think, oh, well,
just because.
Yeah, obviously they can because they said it. Don't get distracted by vague LOIs, dazzling offers without proof. Call those, if it's a strategic or if it's a private equity group, just like Brandon said, get some backup, get some proof. Who have you bought, and can we talk to some of those guys? That's one of the best things. That's like checking references for an employee coming through.
Absolutely.
You're going to find out whether that's going to work out very quickly or not, and you're going to save yourself a lot of time.
And that applies to the advisors. We don't mind providing references. That should go for CPAs and lawyers too, because let's be honest, not every lawyer should be doing a lower middle market deal. We've got some good attorneys we've used, but there are attorneys I've dealt with that had no business even doing a Main Street deal. I mean, there's some I've seen where they want to do the local title closing attorney, and that's fine. But just understand this is a business transaction, and didn't even write the original drafted documents to have a non compete in it. Didn't even have the DBA names and the assets transferring properly. Like, this is who you're paying to be the attorney. You're going to spend multiple six figures, let this person dictate your future. Please use the right people, and it's okay to ask, and it's okay to be unsure sometimes too. It's okay to question. I recommend you somebody regionally you can look in the eye. This is my personal preference. I think you should see somebody you can go sit down and talk to if you need to, because nothing works better than face-to-face communication. That no matter, I don't care what AI brings to the table. I don't care what someone says. When you can look that person in the eye or see them relatively soon, that matters. And the bigger the deal, the more on the line, you need to be comfortable. Because if you're not comfortable as a seller, it's okay to have some doubt. It's okay to have some anxiety on it. It's part of a natural process of having a lot of psychological impact from selling a large company or a lot of money coming through. But you have to eventually get comfortable. And if you can't do that with the process you're doing, you need to take a step back and be transparent and address those issues, because they're not going to go away after the closing or towards the closing. Unless you know, hey, I'm only uncomfortable because X, Y, Z, and the LOI hasn't been decided yet. We're going to get there. That's different. I'm talking if you don't feel like I got a bad feeling about this deal, or I don't think my lawyer understands what's going on, be vocal, speak up, and be transparent. We want to know if you have a question. If you don't tell us, we don't know sometimes. Same for the attorney, same for the CPA. Don't nod your head like, oh, I get the language. I like it. I like what you're saying. And then the next day go, I really didn't like that. I really wasn't comfortable with that language. What? We have now set expectations. You were good with that. Now we're tearing it back down. Be transparent up front, or say, if you don't know, say, I need time to think about it, and then go ask for help if you don't want to say it on the phone call or in front of someone else. That's okay, but be transparent, please. Be comfortable. Nothing's worse than a seller that says they like the LOI, signs it, and then the next day, Chris, I really didn't like those terms, but I thought we'd just get the process started.
Jesus.
Fly my chair back in this podcast. Like,
Yeah.
talk about drive me up a wall. And
Yeah,
I don't
I would
want
say
that
if
for
you're
them either.
no, if you're thinking about selling, or you've even got people that have inquired about your business, and it's kind of brought some thoughts to your process, like maybe this is something I want to explore. Please, even if it's not Brandon or
Share.
myself, surround yourself with a broker or M&A advisor who understands this space and has direct relationships with all the people that you need to be in touch with, whether it's other buyers or CPAs, transactional attorneys. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about finding a buyer. It's about finding the right buyer. You've got to find the right buyer. It's not just interest and people showing up and asking. It's about finding that right buyer who can actually get it closed. That's what today's podcast is all about.
It's exactly well stated. Couldn't have said it better myself. That's what matters. And we'll call everybody to action out there. And if you're listening, you're thinking about that, take the steps and advice we gave you today and apply it to your thought process. You don't have to have an answer today. You don't need to be, this is the only playbook to follow. What we outlined was a way for you to understand what's in front of you, to digest it. And like any good deal, you as a seller need to be committed if you're going to market to going to market. And if you're not committed, but you get approached, understand what that means as far as lifestyle change, your workload, the stress involved with that. And if you don't want it, don't go down the road, because you're just going to burn time and burn yourself out and scorn yourself on the process, because it's always going to be a process. It's never going to be just, here's the keys, take them and go. It's never that. It's never that easy. So just get that out of your head. And if someone told you it was, I would be a bit skeptical. It's never quite that simple. Everybody wants to brag about the great deal they got. No one wants to talk about the headaches it was to get it done sometimes, especially when there are always going to be bumps in a transaction. It's never perfect. It just isn't. So if we've left you with anything today, I think those are the great points to consider. As always, myself or Chris are here to help. We're happy to help. We love talking to you. We want to be a resource. We stress that to people. Don't go in this process blind. And as always, take our advice with a grain of salt, because every situation is fluid. On that note, Chris, is there anything else we should add? I think we hit every nail in the head, knocked it in the board, and it's done.
Seems like a done one to me. I think we beat a couple subjects to death, but hopefully we gave some really good information to people who need it.
And that's exactly what we wanted. Give you good advice, fair advice, and honest advice. So on that note, we will see you next week on the Steps to Soul podcast, and tune in for more great clips, shorts, and info to help you sell your business. On that note, I'm Brandon Bourgeois. That is Chris Sater. We will see you next time.